People assume that having few or no friends means something is wrong with you. But what if the opposite is true? What if your mind simply operates on a deeper level? One that gets exhausted by fake smiles, shallow conversations, and constant social noise. Some people aren't built for crowds, small talk, or performative relationships. They see more, feel more, and think more. And because of that, they don't give their energy easily. This isn't loneliness. This is awareness. The uncompromising authenticity detector. Why some souls would rather walk alone than live a lie. There exists a particular kind of person who moves through the world with an almost supernatural ability to detect falseness. And if you are one of them, you already know the peculiar loneliness that comes with this gift. These individuals possess what can only be described as an internal truth-sensing mechanism that operates constantly in the background of every interaction, scanning for misalignments between what people say and what they actually mean, between the smile someone wears and the genuine emotion behind their eyes, between the words offered in friendship and the hidden calculations lurking beneath the surface. While most people navigate social situations accepting things at face value, content to participate in the comfortable dance of polite society where everyone agrees to overlook small deceptions and minor manipulations in the name of keeping things pleasant, these authenticity detectors cannot turn off their awareness even if they wanted to. Their nervous system seems wired differently, picking up on micro-expressions that flash across a face for just a fraction of a second, noticing the slight change in vocal tone when someone shifts from genuine conversation to performance mode, feeling the energetic shift in a room when someone enters with an agenda they're trying to conceal. This is not paranoia or cynicism, but rather an acute sensitivity to the subtle inconsistencies that reveal when someone is not being fully real, when they're wearing a mask, when they're saying one thing while their body language, energy, and true intentions tell an entirely different story. The forced smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the compliment delivered with just a hint of tension in the jaw, the friendly gesture that somehow feels like it comes with invisible strings attached, the enthusiasm that rings hollow because it's being performed rather than felt, the validation offered not because it's genuine, but because the giver wants something in return or is following some social script they learned long ago about how to make people like them. Most people either don't notice these discrepancies or have trained themselves to ignore them, because acknowledging inauthenticity in others can be deeply uncomfortable and socially inconvenient. But for those with this particular sensitivity, ignoring what they perceive is simply not possible. It would be like asking them to ignore a blaring alarm or pretend they don't smell smoke in a burning building. The awareness is automatic and undeniable. And once they've registered that someone is being fake with them, something fundamental shifts in their ability to engage with that person. Trust, once compromised by detected inauthenticity, becomes almost impossible to rebuild because they know what they saw, what they felt, what their instincts told them about the gap between appearance and reality. This creates a difficult situation because modern social life often requires a certain amount of performance. A certain willingness to engage in small talk we don't really care about, to express interest in things that bore us, to smooth over conflicts with polite fictions, to participate in the elaborate theater of networking, workplace relationships, and casual friendships where everyone understands that not everything needs to be deeply authentic as long as it's pleasant enough. But for the person who cannot tolerate inauthenticity, these everyday social compromises feel like slow suffocation, like being asked to betray themselves over and over in small ways until they no longer recognize who they've become. They would genuinely rather be alone, genuinely prefer solitude and silence to the exhausting experience of sitting in a room full of people engaging in surface-level interactions, pretending to enjoy conversations that have no real substance, smiling at jokes that aren't funny, nodding along to opinions they find ridiculous, or worst of all, having to manufacture their own false enthusiasm and fake connection just to fit in with people who seem perfectly comfortable living this way. The choice they make, again and again, is to protect their inner authenticity even when it costs them socially, even when it means being labeled as difficult or antisocial or overly serious. even when it means missing out on opportunities that would come more easily if they could just learn to play the game a little better. They understand that most people see their refusal to engage in emotional dishonesty as a kind of rigidity or social incompetence. But from their perspective, going along with fakeness feels like a profound betrayal of the self, like slowly eroding their own soul in exchange for acceptance from people who don't even know them and wouldn't particularly like the real them if they did. So they choose differently. They choose the harder path of honesty, even when it isolates them. They choose to wait for the rare, genuine connections rather than filling their life with shallow ones. They choose quality over quantity in friendships, depth over breadth in conversations, truth over comfort in their interactions. This is not to say they are perfect or always kind or somehow superior to others, but rather that they have made a fundamental decision about how they want to move through the world, and that decision prioritizes internal integrity over external belonging. They have looked at the trade-off most people make, trading authenticity for acceptance, and they have decided the price is too high. They have sat in enough rooms full of fake laughter, endured enough conversations where everyone was performing versions of themselves designed to impress or manipulate or maintain status, participated in enough shallow interactions disguised as friendship to know that this path leads nowhere they want to go. And yes, the alternative is often lonely. Yes, it means sometimes going to events alone or not going at all. Yes, it means having fewer friends, but knowing the ones they have are real. Yes, it means sometimes being misunderstood by people who think they're just being difficult when really they're being protective of something precious inside themselves that gets damaged every time they force themselves to be fake. The world keeps spinning. People keep playing their social games. And somewhere in the midst of it all walks this person who simply cannot make themselves participate in the performance, who cannot turn off their ability to see through the masks, who cannot pretend not to notice when someone is being dishonest, even in small ways, and who has made peace with the fact that their commitment to authenticity will cost them in a society that often values smooth social functioning over genuine human connection, and who carries on anyway, trusting that the occasional real connection they find, the rare person who shows up as genuinely themselves, the moments of true meeting between authentic souls are worth all the loneliness that comes with refusing to settle for anything less. The mind that stars on small talk. Why depth seekers cannot survive on social noise. There is a particular kind of mind that experiences small talk not just as boring or tedious, but as something close to mental starvation, a kind of cognitive emptiness that leaves them feeling drained and disconnected rather than socially satisfied. And if you possess this type of mind, you have probably spent much of your life wondering why everyone else seems perfectly content exchanging pleasantries about the weather, weekend plans, traffic conditions, and the countless other surface-level topics that dominate most social interactions. While others seem genuinely engaged, discussing what they ate for lunch, or complaining about minor inconveniences, or recounting the plot of a television show everyone has already seen, your brain quietly flatlines, desperately searching for substance in the conversation and finding none, like someone dying of thirst being offered empty cups. This is not about being socially awkward or lacking communication skills, and it is definitely not about considering yourself intellectually superior to others, though you have probably been accused of both these things by people who mistake your disengagement for snobbery, when really it is something closer to incompatibility. Like trying to charge a device with the wrong adapter where nothing meaningful can transfer between the connection points. Your mind simply operates on a different frequency, one that seeks meaning, depth, complexity, and genuine exploration of ideas rather than the comfortable exchange of pre-approved social scripts that most casual conversation consists of. When someone asks, "How are you?" without actually wanting to know, when people discuss trivial matters as though they carry weight, when conversations circle endlessly around safe topics that require no vulnerability or original thought, something inside you simply cannot engage even when you want to be polite, even when you recognize that these interactions serve important social bonding functions for others, even when you understand that your inability to enthusiastically participate makes you seem distant or difficult. Your brain is wired to crave conversations that explore the big questions about existence, purpose, human nature, creativity, personal growth, philosophical dilemmas, psychological insights, the nature of reality, the meaning we make from our experiences, the patterns underlying human behavior, the mysteries we are all living inside of whether we acknowledge them or not. You want to talk about what keeps someone awake at night, what they believe about consciousness or mortality or love, what transformed them, what they're struggling to understand, what fascinates or terrifies or inspires them, how they make sense of being alive in this strange universe where we find ourselves aware and temporary. You want access to the inner world of another person, to the real thoughts behind their carefully maintained exterior, to the questions they are wrestling with, the growth they are attempting, the meaning they're trying to create. This hunger for depth is not something you chose or cultivated to be different. It is simply how your mind works. And trying to feel satisfied by small talk is like trying to nourish yourself by eating pictures of food instead of actual meals. The problem is that most social situations are built entirely around this kind of surface-level interaction, where people gather and exchange information that means nothing, where everyone performs interest in topics nobody actually cares about, where the entire point seems to be filling silence rather than creating genuine connection. You have sat through countless dinner parties, networking events, family gatherings, casual hangouts, and workplace conversations where people talk for hours without saying anything real, where every sentence was a placeholder, every exchange a ritual performed without presence or intention, and you have watched your own energy drain away minute by minute as you try to participate in something that felt mentally empty. And the truly exhausting part is that you cannot simply explain this to people without sounding condescending. You cannot say this conversation is too shallow for me to engage with without insulting everyone involved. So instead you smile and nod while your mind quietly disengages, while you retreat into your own thoughts, because at least there you can find something substantive to work with. People notice your absence, even when you're physically present. They sense that you're somewhere else, and they often take it personally, assuming you do not like them or think you are better than them. When the truth is simply that your brain cannot extract anything meaningful from the interaction, so it stops trying, the same way your eyes stop focusing on a page that contains no words. This is not arrogance, but alignment, not judgment, but compatibility, not superiority, but simply a different operating system that requires different inputs to function. You do not look down on people who enjoy small talk any more than someone who needs glasses looks down on people with perfect vision. You simply recognize that what nourishes them leaves you empty, and what you need from conversation is something most people either cannot or will not provide. The conversations you crave require vulnerability, intellectual curiosity, emotional honesty, willingness to explore uncomfortable ideas, comfort with uncertainty and complexity, and the kind of presence that most people reserve for their most intimate relationships, if they offer it at all. You want to know what someone actually thinks, not what they think they should think or what sounds good to say in polite company. You want to explore ideas together, to build understanding collaboratively, to challenge and be challenged, to go deeper than the surface until you hit something true and real and alive. You want conversations that leave you different than when they started, that shift your perspective or clarify your thinking or introduce you to possibilities you had not considered, that feel like genuine exchanges of meaning rather than social maintenance. And these conversations are rare, so rare that you have learned not to expect them in most contexts, so rare that when you finally encounter someone capable of meeting you at this level, the relief and joy are almost overwhelming, like someone who's been holding their breath finally allowed to breathe. The rest of the time, you navigate a world where most interaction feels like noise, where people talk constantly, but say very little, where social connection is measured in time, spent together rather than depth achieved, where a natural way of engaging is seen as too intense or too serious or too much. You have learned to mask your boredom, to ask the appropriate follow-up questions about topics you do not care about, to feign interest in stories that lead nowhere, to participate in the social theater well enough to avoid being labeled as rude or strange. But inside, you're counting the minutes until you can return to solitude, where at least your mind can engage with books, ideas, creative projects, or your own thoughts that contain more substance than most of the conversations available to you. This creates a peculiar kind of loneliness where you can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone because you are not actually connecting with anyone, where you end up preferring isolation to shallow socializing, because at least isolation is honest about what it is. You have been told countless times that you think too much, that you should just relax and enjoy simple conversation, that not everything needs to be deep, and perhaps there is some truth in this. Perhaps there is value in learning to appreciate different modes of connection, but there's also something important in honoring what your mind genuinely needs rather than forcing yourself to be satisfied with what leaves you empty. The depth you seek in conversation is not a luxury or an affectation, but a genuine requirement for feeling mentally alive and connected. And you have every right to prioritize relationships and interactions that actually feed you rather than depleting you. This might mean having fewer friends, but closer ones. Might mean skipping social events that will only drain you. Might mean being more selective about where you invest your limited energy for socializing. Might mean accepting that you will often be misunderstood by people who operate differently. But it also means protecting your inner life, honoring your actual needs, and holding out for the connections that feel real rather than filling your life with interactions that leave you feeling more isolated than being alone ever could. Your mind is not broken for needing depth. The world is just very noisy, and most of that noise is designed to prevent the very thing you are seeking, designed to keep everything surface level and comfortable and safe, and your refusal to settle for that kind of emptiness is not a flaw, but a commitment to something more meaningful. Even when that commitment costs you in a society that often mistakes volume for connection and confuses talking with actually saying something worth hearing. The overwhelmed empath. When your nervous system reads everything and silence becomes survival. There exists a particular type of human being whose nervous system operates like an extraordinarily sensitive instrument, constantly receiving and processing vastly more information than the average person even realizes exists in any given moment. And if you are one of these people, you know the particular exhaustion that comes from simply existing in a world that feels like it is always turned up to maximum volume, even when everyone else seems perfectly comfortable with the noise level. Your brain does not just hear the words people say. It registers the microscopic shift in vocal tone that reveals the speaker is not quite as confident as they are pretending to be. It notices the fraction of a second hesitation before someone answers a question that tells you they are calculating their response rather than speaking spontaneously. It picks up on the slight tightening around someone's eyes that betrays irritation they are working hard to conceal behind a polite smile. While others are having a straightforward conversation about ordinary topics, you're simultaneously processing dozens of additional data streams, reading body language with the precision of someone trained in behavioral analysis, except you never had to study it, because your system just naturally does this, sensing the emotional temperature of every person in the room and how it shifts moment by moment, feeling the tension between two people who are pretending everything is fine, noticing when someone's energy changes as they switch from genuine engagement to performing interest, detecting the subtle ways people position themselves physically to indicate alliance or distance or dominance or submission in the social hierarchy. This is not something you consciously choose to do or can easily turn off. It is simply how your neurology processes the world, taking in everything, filtering nothing, maintaining constant high alert awareness of every nuance and undercurrent in your environment. What this means in practical terms is that a simple coffee meeting with a friend contains more information for you to process than most people encounter in an entire day. Because you're not just having one conversation, you're tracking multiple simultaneous layers of meaning, monitoring the emotional states of everyone involved, sensing what is not being said, feeling the energy dynamics at play, and doing all of this while also trying to participate normally in the actual verbal exchange, happening at the surface level. By the time you leave that hour-long coffee date, you are absolutely depleted, not because anything particularly dramatic happened, but because your system has been working at maximum capacity the entire time, processing exponentially more data than the average nervous system handles. And this kind of intensive processing burns through your energy reserves at an alarming rate. Now multiply this experience across all the social interactions, Work meetings, family gatherings, errands in crowded stores, commutes on public transportation, and every other moment you spend around other human beings. And you begin to understand why someone with this level of sensory and emotional processing capacity ends up feeling chronically drained by ordinary life that other people navigate without apparent difficulty. You are not weak or antisocial or broken. You're simply operating hardware that is calibrated to an entirely different sensitivity level. Like comparing a standard television to a device that can detect every possible frequency and wavelength simultaneously. And while this sensitivity gives you access to tremendous amounts of information and insight that others miss entirely, it also means you cannot spend unlimited time in stimulating environments without experiencing serious system overload. The exhaustion you feel after social interaction is not psychological or emotional in the way people usually mean those terms. It is neurological. It is your actual nervous system becoming overstimulated from processing too much input for too long without sufficient recovery time. You absorb the anxiety of the nervous person sitting across from you at dinner. You feel the sadness emanating from the stranger standing next to you in the elevator. You pick up on the unspoken conflict simmering between your coworkers, even though they are both smiling. You sense the subtle emotional weather patterns moving through every space you occupy, and all of this registers in your body as sensation, as feeling, as information that your system then has to sort and process and manage. Most people have natural filters that protect them from this level of input. They simply do not perceive most of what you're perceiving. Their nervous systems screen out the subtle signals as irrelevant noise, allowing them to focus on the primary conversation or task without being constantly distracted by emotional and energetic data. But your filters are either very thin or non-existent, which means everything comes through, everything registers, everything matters to your system, whether you want it to or not. This is why you can walk into a room and immediately feel that something is off even when everyone is acting normal. Why you know someone is lying even when their story is perfectly consistent. Why you can sense attraction or hostility or fear in others before they have consciously acknowledged these feelings themselves. Why you pick up on family dynamics and power struggles and hidden alliances that are completely invisible to less sensitive observers. You are reading a completely different book than most people are reading when you look at the same situation. You have access to chapters and footnotes and marginalia that others do not even know exist. And while this could be a remarkable gift in terms of understanding human nature, navigating complex social situations, offering genuine empathy, and seeing truth beneath surface appearances, it is also absolutely exhausting to live with. The world is not designed for people with your level of sensitivity. Social norms assume everyone is processing approximately the same amount of information. Expectations around work schedules and social obligations do not account for the fact that you need significantly more recovery time than others. And people often interpret your need for solitude as rejection or antisocial behavior, when really it is basic self-care, the equivalent of someone with sensitive eyes needing to rest in darkness after spending time in bright light. Silence and solitude are not loneliness for you. They are medicine. They're the reset button your overstimulated system desperately needs. They're the only environment where you are not constantly bombarded with information to process. When you are alone, you do not have to monitor anyone's emotional state. You do not have to track subtle shifts in tone and energy. You do not have to manage the feelings you are absorbing from others. You do not have to maintain the performance of seeming normal while your system runs itself ragged processing everything. Alone, you can finally let all those perceptual channels rest. You can exist without input. You can allow your nervous system to discharge all the accumulated stimulation and return to something like baseline calm. This is why you might cancel plans, even though you genuinely like the people involved. Why you need entire days with no social obligations to feel human again. Why you have learned to be very protective of your alone time, because you know from experience what happens when you do not get enough of it. How you become irritable and overwhelmed and unable to function, well, when your system has been overstimulated for too long without adequate rest. People who do not experience the world this way often do not understand. They think you're being flaky or difficult, or that you do not really want to spend time with them. They take it personally when you need to retreat. They cannot comprehend why someone would choose to be alone instead of going to the party, or joining the group activity, or accepting the invitation. They do not understand that for you, that party is not fun and relaxing. It is an endurance test. It is hours of your system working overtime, processing the emotional states and micro-expressions and tonal shifts of dozens of people simultaneously. It is sensory and emotional overload disguised as entertainment. You tried to explain this and found that most people cannot really grasp it. They might intellectually understand the words you're saying, but they cannot feel what you are describing because their nervous systems simply do not work this way. It is like trying to explain color to someone who has only ever seen in black and white. The referent experience is missing. So you have largely stopped trying to justify your need for solitude and have instead simply accepted that this is part of your operating requirements, that you need more alone time than most people, that social interaction has a real energetic cost for you that others do not pay, that protecting your sensitivity means honoring its needs rather than trying to force yourself to function like someone wired differently. This might mean having a smaller social circle, might mean being selective about which events you attend, might mean disappointing people sometimes when you choose rest over socializing, might mean being misunderstood by those who mistake your self-preservation for aloofness. But it also means respecting your actual nature rather than trying to contort yourself into someone you're not. Means recognizing that your high sensory and emotional processing capacity is both gift and burden and requires you to live differently than people who do not carry this particular wiring. You are not less than for needing more recovery time. You are not failing at life because you cannot maintain the social schedule others seem to handle easily. You are simply being realistic about what your nervous system can handle and what it cannot, and choosing to work with your nature rather than against it. The silence you seek is not empty or sad. It is full and rich and necessary. It is where you restore yourself, where you process everything you have absorbed, where you remember who you are underneath all the input, where you can finally just be without performing or monitoring or managing anything outside yourself. And perhaps most importantly, that silence is where you prove to yourself that you are complete as you are, that you do not need constant external stimulation or validation or company to feel whole, that you can be your own source of peace in a world that constantly demands more than your sensitive system can sustainably give without breaking down entirely. The universe within. Why some minds are already full without anyone else in the room. There is a particular type of person who carries an entire universe inside their own mind. A rich and endlessly fascinating inner world, so vibrant and active that external entertainment often feels like a pale imitation of the thoughts, ideas, imaginings, and reflections already happening in the privacy of their own consciousness. And if you are one of these people, you have probably spent considerable time trying to explain to others why you genuinely do not feel lonely when alone, why you can spend entire weekends without speaking to another human being and emerge feeling refreshed rather than isolated. Why the idea of doing nothing actually means something very different to you than it does to people who experience their own minds as empty spaces that need constant filling from outside sources. Your inner world is not a void that screams to be occupied with noise and distraction and other people's presence. It is more like a vast library combined with an art studio, a laboratory, a theater, and a sanctuary all rolled into one endlessly explorable space where your thoughts unfold in complex patterns, where your imagination constructs entire scenarios and possibilities, where you revisit conversations and experiences to extract deeper meaning from them, where you ask yourself questions that lead to more questions that branch into entire philosophical explorations, where you observe your own mind at work with the same fascination others might reserve for watching a gripping film or engaging in lively debate. While many people seem to socialize primarily as an escape mechanism, a way to avoid being alone with thoughts they find uncomfortable or boring or anxiety-inducing, you actually enjoy the company of your own mind. You find yourself interesting. You're genuinely curious about the connections your brain makes, the creative ideas that emerge when you give yourself space to think without interruption, the insights that surface during long stretches of unstructured solitude. This does not mean you dislike people or never want social interaction, but rather that you do not require constant external stimulation to feel engaged with life because you are already deeply engaged with the internal landscape of your own consciousness. You can sit in a quiet room for hours and never once feel bored because your mind is always doing something, always processing, always creating, always exploring some thread of thought or memory or possibility, always finding new angles on old questions, always generating content that you find genuinely compelling. When other people say they are just thinking, they often mean they are worrying or ruminating or replaying some specific concern. But when you say you're thinking, you mean you're actively engaged in the pleasurable activity of letting your mind wander through ideas. You are following curiosity wherever it leads. You are building conceptual frameworks. You are imagining alternative scenarios. You are synthesizing information from different domains to see what new understanding might emerge. You are essentially entertaining yourself with the most sophisticated instrument you own, which is your own consciousness. This rich inner life means that solitude feels fundamentally different to you than it does to people whose minds feel empty or anxious when not occupied by external input. And this difference creates a gap in understanding that can be difficult to bridge in conversation, because people tend to assume everyone experiences their own mind the same way. They cannot imagine that you are genuinely content alone because they would be miserable alone. They project their own internal experience onto you and assume you must be lying or in denial when you say you actually prefer your own company much of the time. They think you're trying to make the best of a sad situation rather than recognizing that you are describing your actual authentic experience of fulfillment through internal exploration. You have tried explaining that your mind is an active place, a generative place, a place you genuinely enjoy inhabiting, but people who do not experience this often hear it as either arrogance, as if you're claiming to be so brilliant that you do not need anyone else, or as dysfunction, as if you were damaged in some way that prevents you from getting your needs met through normal social channels. Neither interpretation is accurate. You are simply someone whose internal world happens to be sufficiently rich and engaging that you do not experience the absence of external stimulation as deprivation. Your thoughts entertain you. Your imagination provides endless material to work with. Your capacity for reflection gives you deep satisfaction. Your curiosity about ideas and patterns and connections keeps you perpetually interested in exploring further. You can spend an entire afternoon following a single train of thought through all its implications, or constructing an elaborate creative project in your mind, or working through a complex problem just for the intellectual pleasure of it, or revisiting a conversation from a new angle to understand the dynamics more fully, or imagining how different choices might have led to different outcomes, or simply observing the way your own consciousness operates with the same fascination a naturalist might observe a complex ecosystem. This is not escapism or avoidance. This is genuine engagement with the life of the mind, and it provides a kind of nourishment that social interaction, while valuable in its own right, cannot really replace. Many people seem to use socializing as a way to avoid themselves, to escape the discomfort of their own thoughts, to fill time that would otherwise feel empty and anxious, to distract themselves from questions they do not want to face or feelings they do not want to feel. And while this is completely understandable, it is fundamentally different from how you operate. You socialize when you want connection, when you have something to share, when you encounter someone whose mind engages with yours in interesting ways, when external interaction will add something meaningful to your experience. But you do not socialize just to avoid being alone, because being alone does not feel like something that needs avoiding. Your mind is already full, already active, already generating interesting content, already providing you with things to think about and explore and understand more deeply. You are never truly alone in the sense of being without company because you have yourself, and yourself happens to be quite good company, not in an egotistical way, but simply in the sense that your inner world is developed enough to sustain your interest. This capacity for self-sufficiency through internal richness often develops early in life. Many people with vibrant inner worlds were children who spent significant time alone, who learned to entertain themselves through imagination and thought, who discovered early that their own mind could be a source of endless fascination if they learned to engage with it skillfully. Perhaps you were an only child who became expert at solo play, or someone who preferred reading to socializing because books opened doors to ideas and worlds that felt more compelling than playground politics. Or a young person who discovered that your own creative projects and intellectual interests provided deeper satisfaction than most of what passed for fun among your peers. Over time, you developed the infrastructure of a rich inner life. You built up the habits and skills and neural pathways that make solitary thought genuinely enjoyable rather than something to endure. And now, as an adult, you have access to this incredible resource that many people never develop because they have always relied on external sources for stimulation and meaning. This creates interesting challenges in a culture that tends to pathologize solitude and treat constant social engagement as the mark of mental health and success, where someone who genuinely enjoys spending time alone is often viewed with suspicion or concern, where you might find yourself having to defend your preference for internal exploration against people who assume you must be depressed or isolated or missing out on life. You are not missing out. You are engaged with life in a different mode, one that happens to take place primarily in the space between your ears rather than in crowded rooms or busy social calendars. And this mode is every bit as valid and valuable as more extroverted ways of being. Your strong internal world is not a compensation for social deficiency. It is a genuine source of richness and meaning in your life. It is where you do some of your most important work of understanding yourself and the world, where you process experience and generate insight, where you create and imagine and wonder and question in ways that require solitude and silence to fully unfold. When you spend a weekend alone, you are not enduring isolation. You are giving yourself the gift of uninterrupted time with thoughts and ideas and creative possibilities that get crowded out when your attention is constantly pulled outward by social demands. When you decline an invitation to stay home, you are not choosing loneliness over connection. You're choosing the kind of engagement that happens to nourish you most deeply, which is engagement with your own mind and its infinite capacity to explore and create and understand. When you seem distant during surface-level conversation, it is not because you're rude or disengaged from life. It is because part of you is always monitoring the internal world, always aware of thoughts percolating beneath the surface, always maintaining connection to that rich inner space, even while participating in external interaction. This dual awareness can make you seem distracted or elsewhere to people who live primarily through external engagement. But really you are more present than most, present to both the outer and inner dimensions of experience simultaneously, refusing to abandon your internal world even when the external world demands your full attention. Living this way requires you to honor your need for solitude, to protect time for internal exploration, to resist pressure to fill every moment with external activity, to be willing to seem unusual or antisocial to people who cannot understand that your mind is genuinely interesting company, that your thoughts provide real fulfillment, that your imagination and curiosity and capacity for reflection create a kind of richness that no amount of superficial socializing could replace. You have learned that your strong internal world is not something to apologize for or hide. It is your greatest resource, your deepest source of creativity and understanding and genuine satisfaction. And the only way to truly honor it is to give it the space and silence and solitude it needs to flourish, even when that means living differently than people who require constant external stimulation to feel alive, even when it means being misunderstood by those who mistake your contentment in solitude for loneliness, even when it means choosing your own company over entertainment that would leave you feeling emptier than you started, because you know something that many people never discover, which is that the universe within is vast and endlessly fascinating, and spending time there is not isolation, but rather the deepest form of coming home to yourself. The self-sufficient soul. When you don't need people, you finally choose the right ones. There exists a particular kind of independence that fundamentally transforms how someone moves through the world and relates to other people. And it is not the superficial independence of simply living alone or paying your own bills, but rather a deep psychological and emotional self-sufficiency that means you have genuinely learned to meet your own needs in ways that most people outsource to others their entire lives. And if you have developed this level of independence, you know both the tremendous freedom it provides and the profound loneliness it can sometimes create. Because when you truly do not need other people to function, your entire approach to relationships changes in ways that can be difficult for others to understand or accept. You have taught yourself, whether through necessity or intention or simply through the way your personality naturally developed, how to solve your own problems without immediately reaching out for help or validation or rescue from someone else. You have learned to sit with difficult emotions and process them internally rather than needing another person to soothe or distract you from what you are feeling. You have cultivated the ability to entertain yourself and find meaning in solitude rather than experiencing your own company as something to escape as quickly as possible. This self-sufficiency is not cold or robotic. It does not mean you lack feelings or never struggle or have somehow transcended normal human vulnerability, but rather that you have developed a robust internal capacity to handle what life brings without requiring constant external support to remain functional. When something goes wrong, your first instinct is not to call someone or seek advice or look for someone to fix it for you, but rather to sit with the problem yourself, to think it through from multiple angles, to consider your options, to make a decision based on your own judgment, and then deal with the consequences yourself. When you feel sad or anxious or overwhelmed, you do not immediately need someone else to make you feel better. You have learned techniques and practices that allow you to regulate your own emotional state, whether that is through journaling or walking or sitting with the feeling until it passes, or using whatever methods you have discovered actually work for your particular nervous system. When you have free time, you do not panic about filling it with social plans or feel that empty space in your calendar is a kind of failure. You genuinely look forward to time alone because you have cultivated interests and activities and ways of being that do not require anyone else's participation. This level of independence is relatively rare because most people, whether they realize it or not, are deeply dependent on others for their emotional regulation, problem-solving, entertainment, sense of identity, and basic feelings of okayness in the world. They have organized their entire lives around maintaining relationships that meet these needs, and they cannot really imagine functioning without this external support system constantly in place. But you can imagine it because you live it. You have proven to yourself repeatedly that you can handle difficult situations alone, that you can comfort yourself through hard times, that you can create a meaningful life even without constant companionship. And this proof changes everything about how you approach relationships. Because here is the truth that makes you fundamentally different from people who need others. You do not choose people out of desperation or loneliness or fear of being alone. You choose them because they genuinely add something meaningful to your already functional life. This is not a small distinction. This is the difference between relationships built on dependency and relationships built on genuine appreciation, between keeping people around because you need them to fill some lack in yourself, and choosing people because their presence actually enhances an existence that is already complete without them. When you're not dependent on social connection for your basic well-being, you suddenly become extraordinarily selective about who gets access to your time and energy and inner world. Because every relationship now has an opportunity cost. Every hour spent with someone who does not truly add value is an hour you could have spent alone doing something you genuinely enjoy or with someone who actually enriches your experience. You start asking different questions before getting close to people. Does this person make me think in new ways or just repeat comfortable patterns? Do our conversations leave me energized and inspired or drained and vaguely irritated? Does their presence in my life add something real, or are we just keeping each other company out of habit or social expectation? Is this person capable of the kind of depth and authenticity I value, or are we going to stay forever on the surface? Do I actually like who I am when I'm around them, or do I find myself performing some diminished version of myself to keep things comfortable? These are ruthless questions that most people never ask because they cannot afford to. They need their social connections too badly to be this discriminating. They will tolerate mediocre friendships and draining relationships and surface-level connections because the alternative of being alone feels worse to them than the low-grade dissatisfaction of keeping people around who do not truly matter. But you can afford to ask these questions because being alone is not a fate worse than death for you. It is actually quite pleasant. It is your baseline state of contentment from which you will only be pulled by people and experiences that genuinely justify the energy expenditure. This naturally and inevitably shrinks your social circle, because if you are being honest, most people do not pass these criteria. Most relationships are based on convenience or proximity or shared circumstances rather than genuine mutual enrichment. Most friendships are maintained through momentum and habit rather than because both people are actively choosing each other based on real compatibility and value. When you remove dependency from the equation, when you stop keeping people around just to avoid loneliness, or because you think you're supposed to have a certain number of friends, or because everyone else seems to maintain these connections so you feel you should too, you discover that very few relationships actually survive the filter of, does this genuinely add meaningful value to my life? And this could be uncomfortable to realize. This moment when you look at your social connections honestly and recognize that many of them persist, not because they are particularly fulfilling, but because they have simply always been there, because you have not actively questioned them, because ending them would be awkward or create social complications or force you to admit that you have been investing in something that does not actually serve you. But once you have seen this clearly, you cannot unsee it, and your independent nature will not let you continue investing energy in relationships that do not meet your actual standards just for the sake of maintaining appearances or avoiding the social awkwardness of letting connections fade. So your circle shrinks, and it keeps shrinking until it contains only the people who truly matter, the rare individuals who bring something real to the table, whose presence in your life represents genuine mutual enrichment rather than just filling time or meeting social obligations. These remaining people are chosen with intention and maintained with care precisely because they have passed the high bar your independence allows you to set. They're the ones whose conversation actually engages your mind, whose company you genuinely prefer to your own sometimes, who challenge and inspire and understand you in ways that feel rare and valuable, who respect your independence rather than trying to create dependency, who bring their own wholeness to the relationship rather than looking to you to complete them. With these people, the relationship feels entirely different from the kind of social dependency that characterizes most human connection. It feels like two whole people choosing to share space rather than two half people trying to make a whole. It feels like genuine appreciation rather than need, like collaboration rather than codependency, like freedom rather than obligation. And paradoxically, your very independence makes these relationships deeper and more authentic than what most dependent people experience. Because the people in your small circle know they are genuinely chosen rather than needed. They know you could be perfectly fine without them, and yet you actively choose to include them in your life anyway. And there is something incredibly powerful about being chosen from a place of wholeness rather than from a place of lack. Your independence also protects these relationships from many of the dysfunctions that plague connections built on need. You do not manipulate or guilt or try to control the other person because you're not dependent on them behaving in certain ways to maintain your own stability. You can give them freedom to be themselves because you're not requiring them to be anything other than authentic. You can have difficult conversations and set boundaries and sometimes disagree because the relationship is not so fragile that honesty will destroy it. You can let people go if the connection no longer serves both parties because you know you will be okay regardless. This way of relating is foreign to most people who have built their entire identity and well-being around maintaining relationships that they secretly fear would collapse if they ever stopped managing and performing and carefully maintaining the right conditions, who cannot afford to be fully honest because they need the connection too much to risk it, who stay in relationships long past their expiration date because being alone feels impossible. But you live differently. You have built a life that. The guarded heart, when trust becomes something you earn, not something you're given. There is a particular kind of caution that develops in people who have been hurt deeply enough to learn that not everyone deserves access to the tender parts of themselves, And this caution is not the result of one single devastating betrayal, but rather the accumulated weight of multiple experiences where they opened themselves honestly and vulnerably only to have that openness exploited, dismissed, weaponized, or carelessly discarded by people who did not recognize the gift they were being given. If you carry this kind of wariness now, you remember what it was like before, when you were more open and trusting, when you believed that most people were fundamentally good and that honesty would be met with honesty, when you offered your real self freely to others assuming they would handle it with care, when you extended trust as a default setting rather than something that needed to be carefully earned over time through consistent demonstration of worthiness. You remember the specific moments that changed you, the friend who shared your secrets with others as entertainment, the partner who used your vulnerabilities against you during arguments, the family member who betrayed your confidence when it was convenient for them, the colleague who smiled to your face while undermining you behind your back, the person you loved who turned out to be performing a version of themselves rather than showing you who they actually were. And each of these experiences taught you something painful but necessary about human nature and the importance of protecting yourself from people who have not proven they deserve access to your inner world. These were not abstract lessons learned from books or cautionary tales heard secondhand. These were lived experiences where you felt the actual pain of betrayal, the confusion of having your trust violated, the anger at yourself for not seeing the warning signs earlier, the deep disappointment of realizing someone you cared about was not who you thought they were, and the profound loneliness that comes from understanding that you cannot actually be fully yourself with most people because most people will not honor what you share with them. The accumulation of these experiences created something in you that others sometimes mistake for coldness or emotional unavailability or being closed off, but is actually something more like wisdom, a hard-earned understanding that trust is precious and should not be distributed freely to everyone who wants it, but rather carefully given only to those who have demonstrated through their consistent actions over time that they will treat it as the valuable thing it is. You are not damaged or broken or incapable of connection. You have simply learned discernment. You have developed the crucial skill of reading people accurately before deciding how much of yourself to reveal. You have created internal boundaries that protect your most vulnerable parts from being casually damaged by people who have not earned the right to access them. This means you move more slowly in relationships than many people do. You do not immediately share your deepest thoughts and feelings with new acquaintances. You do not assume that someone is safe just because they seem friendly or because you have known them for a certain amount of time. You do not confuse surface-level pleasantness with actual trustworthiness. And you certainly do not offer intimate access to your inner life just because someone asks for it or seems interested in you. Instead, you watch and wait. You observe how people behave when they think no one important is looking. You notice whether their actions align with their words over time. You pay attention to how they treat others, especially people who cannot offer them anything in return. You test the waters with small disclosures before risking larger ones. You create opportunities to see whether someone can hold space for your authentic self, or whether they'll try to manage or fix or judge or use what you share. This process takes time, sometimes months or even years. And many people fail these unspoken tests not because they are terrible humans, but simply because they are not capable of the kind of integrity, consistency, emotional maturity, and genuine care that real trust requires. Some people reveal themselves as gossips who cannot be trusted with private information. Others show that they are fair-weather friends who disappear when you actually need support. Some prove to be takers who only maintain relationships that benefit them. Others demonstrate that they are too caught up in their own issues to be truly present for anyone else. Some turn out to be performers who change their personality, depending on their audience, in ways that make it impossible to know who they really are, and still others simply lack the emotional depth or self-awareness to engage at the level you need from genuine connection. Each time someone fails to meet your standards for trustworthiness, it reinforces your caution and raises your threshold slightly higher. Not because you are becoming bitter or cynical, but because you are becoming more precise about what you actually need from the people you let close to you. You have learned that it is better to be alone than to be in relationships with people you cannot truly trust. Better to have a small circle of genuinely safe people than a large network of connections that are pleasant but ultimately superficial. Better to protect your inner world fiercely than to keep offering it to people who will not cherish it. This high trust threshold means that many people never get past the outer layers of who you are. They encounter your polite but guarded exterior and assume that is all there is. They mistake your careful self-protection for lack of depth or inability to connect. They get frustrated with your pace and interpret your caution as rejection. They want immediate intimacy and interpret your need for time as game playing or emotional withholding. And so they move on to easier connections with people who open up faster and require less proving. And this is fine with you, actually, because those people were never going to pass through your filters anyway. Their impatience and need for quick intimacy already signals that they do not understand what real trust requires, and you would rather they self-select out early than invest energy in a relationship that was never going to reach the depth you need. The people who do earn your trust, who demonstrate through patient consistency that they are worthy of it, who show up authentically over time without trying to rush past your boundaries or make you feel bad for having them, who prove through their actions that they can hold your vulnerabilities with care, who remain steady even when you test them or pull back or show them the less attractive parts of yourself. These people gain access to something incredibly valuable. They get to know the real you beneath all the protective layers. They experience your full presence and authenticity and emotional depth. They receive your loyalty and genuine care and the kind of intimacy that only comes when someone feels truly safe to be themselves. With these rare individuals, you finally relax your vigilance. You allow yourself to be vulnerable in ways you cannot be with most people. You share the thoughts and feelings and experiences you guard so carefully from the world. You let them see your fears and hopes and the complicated reality of who you actually are beneath the competent exterior you show everyone else. This level of intimacy is profound precisely because it is rare, because you have made it rare by being so selective about who earns it. And the people who receive it understand, either consciously or instinctively, that they're being given something precious that you do not offer to just anyone. Your past betrayals and disappointments, painful as they were, taught you to value yourself enough to demand that others value you too. They showed you that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, and that you have every right to protect it until you feel genuinely safe. They trained you to read people more accurately and notice red flags earlier and trust your instincts when something feels off, even if you cannot immediately articulate what is wrong. These hard lessons made you wiser and more discerning. And while the learning process hurt, the result is that you now have standards and boundaries that protect you from wasting years of your life in relationships with people who are never going to meet your needs for genuine connection, honesty, loyalty, and emotional safety. You no longer give yourself away cheaply. You no longer assume the best about people just because you want to believe in them. You no longer ignore warning signs or make excuses for behavior that demonstrates someone is not trustworthy. You no longer prioritize being liked over being safe. And you no longer feel guilty for taking your time to let people prove themselves worthy of your trust. Some people will call you difficult for this, will suggest you have trust issues that need fixing, will imply that your caution is a problem rather than protection, will push you to open up faster than feels comfortable, will try to make you feel bad for not immediately offering them the intimacy they want. And these people reveal, through this very behavior, that they do not understand consent or boundaries or the fact that access to another person's inner life is a privilege to be earned rather than an entitlement to be demanded. The right people, the trustworthy ones, the ones who will actually earn their way into your inner circle, do not push or rush or try to make you feel broken for being careful. They respect your pace because they understand that real trust takes time to build. They appreciate that you are protecting something valuable rather than withholding something they are owed. They prove themselves through consistent actions rather than demanding immediate access through words. And they recognize that your high standards mean that if you do eventually let them in, they have truly earned something worth having. Your guarded heart is not a fortress that needs to be broken down or a wall that needs to be demolished. It is a temple with gates that open only for those who approach with genuine reverence for what lies within. And there is nothing wrong with being the careful guardian of your own inner sanctuary, protecting it from those who would carelessly damage what they do not understand, while creating the possibility for the rare genuine connections that honor both your vulnerability and your strength. The refusal to perform, when being real matters more than belonging. There exists a deep and visceral discomfort that some people feel when surrounded by the performance art that passes for normal social interaction in most settings. And if you are one of these people, you know the particular exhaustion that comes from watching humans constantly perform versions of themselves designed to impress, manipulate, or extract validation from others. From observing the elaborate games people play to establish status and dominance and social positioning, from witnessing the careful curation of personality that happens when someone is more interested in how they appear than in who they actually are. You have sat through countless gatherings where everyone seemed to be playing a role, where conversations felt like competitions to see who could tell the most impressive story or drop the most important name or demonstrate the most desirable lifestyle, where people exaggerated their accomplishments and minimized their struggles to maintain some carefully constructed image, where every interaction felt transactional and calculated rather than genuine, where the entire social environment operated on an unspoken agreement that everyone would pretend to be more successful, more happy, more interesting, more together than they actually were, and you would participate in this mutual deception without questioning whether any of it was real. You have watched people change their entire personality depending on who was in the room, becoming louder and more gregarious around certain individuals while turning quiet and submissive around others, altering their opinions to match whoever they were trying to impress, laughing at jokes they did not find funny, expressing interest in topics they did not care about, agreeing with perspectives they did not hold, all in service of some social strategy that treated relationships as games to be, one rather than connections to be genuinely experienced. You have witnessed the validation-seeking behavior that dominates so much of modern social interaction. People fishing for compliments, sharing carefully edited highlights of their lives, while hiding anything that might make them seem less than perfect, constantly checking to see how their performance is being received, adjusting their presentation based on the feedback they get, treating every conversation as an opportunity to boost their social currency rather than as a chance to actually connect with another human being. And somewhere along the way, you realize that you simply cannot participate in this theater, that something fundamental in you rebels against the falseness of it all, that you would rather be alone than spend your limited time and energy pretending to be someone you're not, just to maintain your place in social hierarchies that do not actually matter. This is not about being judgmental or thinking you are better than others. It is about recognizing that the performative social culture exhausts you in ways that feel unsustainable, that wearing a mask, even for short periods, makes you feel disconnected from yourself, that playing status games feels pointless and degrading, that seeking validation from people who do not really know you provides no genuine satisfaction, and that the version of belonging available in these performative spaces is not actually the kind of belonging you want or need. You want to be known as you actually are, not as some carefully managed image. You want relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than strategic positioning. You want to say what you actually think rather than calculating what will make you look good. You want to share real struggles alongside real joys rather than maintaining some impossible standard of perfection. You want to laugh when something is genuinely funny to you rather than performing amusement to fit in. You want to admit when you do not know something rather than pretending expertise you do not have. You want to be quiet when you have nothing to say rather than filling silence with meaningless chatter. You want to show up as your actual self with all your complexity and contradictions and imperfections rather than presenting some sanitized version designed for public consumption. This commitment to authenticity makes you fundamentally incompatible with most social environments where performance is not just expected but required, where people who refuse to play the game are seen as difficult or weird or socially incompetent, where genuine authenticity is actually punished, because it disrupts the comfortable fiction everyone has agreed to maintain. You have learned through experience that most social groups do not actually want authenticity despite claiming to value it. What they want is the performance of authenticity. They want you to share struggles, but only the kind that make you seem brave and inspiring. They want vulnerability, but only the carefully packaged kind that does not make anyone uncomfortable. They want realness, but only the photogenic version that looks good in the story they are telling about themselves and their social circle. When you offer actual authenticity, the raw, unedited kind that includes contradictions and uncertainties and things that do not fit neat narratives, people often do not know what to do with it. They get uncomfortable. They try to manage or fix or redirect you back toward more palatable territory. They signal in subtle or not so subtle ways that you are breaking the unspoken rules about how much realness is acceptable in this context. And you feel this rejection keenly. This message that who you actually are is too much or not enough or somehow inappropriate for the social setting you are in. And you face a choice in these moments. You can either adjust yourself to fit what is being asked of you, put on the mask and play the game and perform the version of yourself that will be more easily accepted. Or you can quietly step away from situations where your authentic self is not actually welcome despite whatever lip service is paid to valuing authenticity. You have chosen the second option enough times that it has become your default response. You have learned to recognize the signs that you are in a performative environment where real connection is not possible. You have developed the ability to sense when people want your performance rather than your presence. And you have given yourself permission to simply leave these situations without guilt or extensive explanation. This means you miss a lot of parties, skip a lot of networking events, decline a lot of social opportunities that others tell you are important for career advancement or social standing or just normal adult life. And you have made peace with being seen as antisocial or difficult or someone who does not make enough effort, because the alternative of forcing yourself to perform feels like a betrayal of something essential in yourself. You will not exaggerate your accomplishments to seem more impressive, because living with the gap between your real self and your presented self creates an internal dissonance you find intolerable. You will not overshare calculated vulnerabilities designed to make you seem deep and self-aware while actually protecting you from genuine exposure, because you understand the difference between performing vulnerability and actually being vulnerable, and the performance version makes you feel dirty in a way you cannot quite articulate. You will not laugh at jokes you find offensive just to avoid social awkwardness, will not nod along with opinions you find absurd just to keep things pleasant, will not express enthusiasm for things that bore you just to fit in with the group, will not change your vocabulary or interests or presentation to match whatever is considered cool or impressive in a particular social context, will not participate in gossip or status games or the subtle social violence people inflict on each other while pretend to be friends. Your refusal to perform these expected behaviors makes you stand out in ways that are not always comfortable. People notice that you're not playing along. They sense that you're operating by different rules than everyone else, and they often interpret this as judgment of them, even when you're simply trying to be honest about yourself. Some people find your authenticity refreshing and are drawn to it precisely because it is so rare. They're tired of performance too and relieved to encounter someone who is willing to be real. And these people sometimes become your closest friends because you can actually be yourselves together without all the exhausting social theater. But many more people are threatened or confused by your refusal to perform. They need everyone to be playing the same game, or it calls into question their own participation in it. They need you to wear a mask so they can feel okay about wearing theirs. And when you show up mask-free, it creates a discomfort they manage by excluding you or labeling you or suggesting something is wrong with you for not being able to navigate normal social situations like everyone else. And maybe they're right in a narrow sense. Maybe you're not good at navigating performative social culture, but that is because you fundamentally reject the premise of it. You do not believe that connection should require performance. You do not accept that belonging should cost you your authenticity. You do not agree that the only way to be accepted is to hide who you really are and present some more palatable version instead. So you keep choosing honestly over belonging, keep stepping away from situations where masks are required, keep refusing to play games you find meaningless even when that refusal costs you socially, keep trusting that somewhere there are people and spaces where your real self will be welcome, where you can show up without performance and be met with genuine connection rather than judgment or discomfort or demands that you be different than you are. This path is lonelier in many ways. Your social circle remains small because you're only interested in relationships where authenticity is actually possible. You spend more time alone than people who are willing to participate in performative socializing. You miss out on opportunities that go to people who are better at playing the game. You sometimes wonder if you're making your own life harder than it needs to be by being so uncompromising about this. But then you remember what it feels like to spend hours in performative social situations and how empty and exhausted and disconnected from yourself you feel afterwards. And you know that no amount of belonging is worth that cost, that you would rather be alone and real than surrounded by people while performing a fiction. That the only kind of social life worth having is one where you can actually show up as yourself and be accepted for who you genuinely are rather than for how well you can pretend to be someone else. That we're never really serving you and have not yet found new ones that actually fit. It means being willing to disappoint people who benefited from your willingness to shrink and who do not understand or support your decision to stop doing that. It means tolerating the discomfort of being seen as difficult or overly particular or unable to just relax and go with the flow like normal people do. But it also means reclaiming yourself. It means discovering what it feels like to move through the world without constantly monitoring and adjusting and performing. It means learning that you can survive and even thrive without the approval of groups that never really saw you anyway. It means finding out what your actual values and interests and needs are underneath all the layers of adaptation you develop to fit in. Means creating the possibility for relationships based on genuine alignment rather than strategic self-presentation. When you finally encounter people or communities where your real self is not just tolerated but actually welcomed, where you do not have to shrink or perform or hide to belong, where alignment exists between who you are and what the group values, the relief is almost overwhelming. Like finally being able to breathe fully after years of taking shallow breaths to make yourself smaller. These aligned connections are rare. You might find only a handful in an entire lifetime, but their quality so far exceeds the quantity of surface-level belonging you left behind that there is no comparison. One genuine relationship with someone who actually knows and values your real self is worth more than 100 friendships with people who only know your performance. You have learned that meaning matters more than acceptance, that being truly seen by even one person is more valuable than being superficially accepted by many, that alignment with your own values and nature is not something you can compromise on without losing yourself entirely, and that the loneliness of walking alone is actually less lonely than the isolation of being surrounded by people who do not know the real you. This understanding shapes every choice you make about where to invest your energy and attention. You evaluate opportunities not based on how many people will be there or how impressive it will look or whether it will boost your status, but based on whether the environment will allow you to show up authentically, whether the people involved value the things you value, whether participation will require you to perform, or whether you can simply be yourself. More often than not, the answer is that performance will be required, that authenticity will not actually be welcomed despite claims to the contrary, that you will need to wear a mask and play the game to fit in. And when you recognize this, you quietly decline, you step away without making a scene or try to convince anyone that they should change. You simply remove yourself from situations that require your self-betrayal as the price of admission. People often do not understand this choice. They see you turning down invitations and withdrawing from groups and spending time alone, and they assume you must be struggling, must be depressed, must be unable to connect, must be missing out on the richness of life that comes from robust social engagement. They cannot comprehend that you are actually choosing richness over poverty, choosing the genuine connection of alignment over the hollow comfort of belonging that costs you yourself, choosing to honor what you actually value rather than adopting whatever values happen to be popular in the spaces available to you. You're not antisocial. You are anti-performance. You are not unable to connect. You are unwilling to connect in ways that require you to be fake. You are not missing out on life. You are refusing to participate in a version of life that would require you to miss out on yourself. The crowds you refuse to join are not better or more alive or more connected than you are in your solitude. They're just louder, just more visible, just more willing to trade authenticity for the comfort of belonging to something even when that something does not actually align with who they are. You have made a different trade. You have chosen the discomfort of sometimes walking alone over the deeper discomfort of being surrounded by people. While feeling fundamentally unseen, you have decided that your alignment with your own truth and values matters more than your acceptance by groups that would require you to abandon that truth. And this decision, difficult as it sometimes is, keeps you whole in ways that performing for belonging never could. Because at the end of each day, you can look at yourself and know that you have not betrayed who you are, that you have not shrunk yourself to fit spaces too small for your full humanity, that you have not performed false enthusiasm or adopted fake values or hidden essential parts of yourself just to avoid the vulnerability of standing alone. And this integrity, this alignment between your inner truth and your outer life, this refusal to participate in the elaborate theater of performative social culture, is the foundation of a kind of freedom that people who live for belonging will never experience. The freedom of knowing that you belong to yourself first and foremost, and that any other belonging that comes your way will be genuine or will be nothing at all. If this message resonated with you, it's because part of you already knew it. Not everyone is meant to be surrounded by noise. Some people are built to see deeper, think clearer, and walk a quieter path. If you're one of them, you're not alone, you're just rare. If this video gave you clarity, like it reaches the minds that need it. Subscribe if you value depth over distraction. Share this with someone who feels misunderstood. And comment below, not to be loud, but to be real. Welcome.